Hi, this is Britt Hoskins. I'm a career advisor with the Career Development Center, and today we're talking about creating great resumes and cover letters. This is something that seems really simple, but it's really difficult to do these well, and it's really important as you're looking for jobs or internships, whether you are just starting out with your first experience or you've been in the working world 20 years. Creating a great resume and cover letter is that first impression of you that employers have, and it's this gatekeeper between you and the job that you really want. So we're going to talk about how to do these in an awesome way. Okay, so let's get started. There we go. So where can you go for resume help? So if you are a student that is located on campus, you can swing into the Career Administration building, which is where the main career center is, and they have drop-in hours every day, Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. And so you don't even have to have your resume together. You can really just wander in with whatever ideas or concepts or things that you have down, and we have a career assistant that will help you. There are resources online on career.oregonstate.edu that you can access and check out, and just tips and things like that there. And then you can also make an advisor with your career advisor from your college. So for example, I'm the career advisor for the colleges of Agricultural Sciences, Forestry, and Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences. And I also meet with students, online students. So I do phone appointments, and so you can make an appointment with a career advisor from your college through Handshake. So there is help for resumes. You don't have to do this on your own. There's online help, as well as people that are designated to help you with this. So don't think that you have to go it on your own. So my first question that I like to start with is, what makes a resume great or #fail? And the reason I'm asking this is because a lot of people approach resumes with the wrong philosophy in their mind. So they think of it like, how can I get the maximum amount of stuff about me crammed into one page? And the problem with that is it's a very me-centric way of thinking about the resume, and it's not thinking about the employer and what they want to see and what's going to be usable for them. And so instead, I want you to think of a resume as a document that sells your skills really quickly, but it's not just trying to come up with everything you can think of about yourself and get it into a page. So I like to ask people this question. If your resume is in a stack of 100 other resumes, how long do you think that the HR team, the HR person, is looking at your resume? How many seconds, how many minutes do you think? So the answer, the rule of thumb is about 6 seconds that an HR person is giving your resume, which seems really shocking. It's like they have to be looking at it longer than that. And yes, I think that they are if you make that first cut. But in the beginning, they're just trying to sort out good resumes, bad resumes, which ones do I want to look more closely at. And once they've picked their finalists, they're going to look at those more closely. But you have to think about, how can I make my resume get past that 6-second scan? So the first step that I advise, and this is a step that I think a lot of people skip, is analyze the job. So don't start with writing about yourself. Start by looking at the job and thinking about the job. So, and it depends on your style. You might be someone that really likes to work with paper, and so maybe you print the job ad out and you get out a highlighter and you start going through that posting and seeing what are those skills that they're really asking for and highlighting those, and be like, okay, they're saying communication skills a lot. They're saying working with people a lot. I want to make sure that my resume reflects that. Or maybe you're in the sciences. They're talking a lot about samples and analysis. Okay, I want to make sure those words are in my resume. So think about that. Take a little bit of time to step back and reflect on the job and what the employer really wants before you dive in. And some of this research too can be online, looking through the company. What are their main products and services? What are they selling? What are they trying to accomplish? Sometimes you can find stuff in the news about that company. They have press releases or company blogs, anything that can help inform what's important to them and that you can match what you do to what they need. So formatting. This is one of the trickiest parts of resumes, and I could probably talk about this for a really long time, but we're just going to give a quick overview. So there are several types of resumes. Really, yours could be any combination of these kind of techniques. The most common one that you'll see is the reverse chronological resume. So that lists accomplishments in order of date. And when we say reverse, we're meaning most recent, going backwards in time. So if you have an internship right now, it would be higher up than that internship that you had 3 years ago, for example. This format is the most common. It tends to work pretty well for your average college student who doesn't have a ton of experience yet. But there are other ways to do it, and one of the other common ways to do it is a functional or skills-based resume. And this is, instead of using chronology to organize your thoughts, you're using more skills clusters. So, for example, you might have a header that is called Building Customer Relationships. And then under that, you list all the jobs or all the projects that are relevant to that topic or that skill. Skills resumes are definitely harder to organize, but sometimes I think they can be helpful, especially if you're someone that is switching fields, for example, like a non-traditional student. I think because you can use headers like fundraising experience to organize your previous jobs instead of just listing the jobs in order and using the job titles, because focusing in around the skills, it's a little easier to show what you've done, even if your path doesn't seem like it totally fits what they're used to. So for me, someone that switched fields, I have a skills-based resume. But it's not the most common, it's not the most easy to organize, so it's just something to consider. I also like to mention that another genre of resumes is the CV. Now, a lot of countries in the world call what I'm talking about as a resume CV, and it's just the word they use is CV. But in the United States, when we say CV or curriculum vitae, we're meaning an academic resume that is often used for graduate school, going for a professorship, something sciencey, being a professor or a researcher of some kind. And so note that, again, this is a topic I could speak a long time on, but CVs tend to be longer. They're very focused on academic accomplishments. And instead of the philosophy being how much information can I share in 6 seconds as that HR person is reading this, it's more how can I show my entire academic record as a history. So you want all of the presentations and all of the publications that you've done and all of the classes you've taught. It's an exhaustive, extensive record. So note that if you are going for a scientific job or going into grad school, you need to be looking up guidelines on CVs, and resumes are going to be a little bit philosophically different. And for a bonus, there's another type of resume that's common, which is if you're going for a state or federal position, a government position, their resumes tend to be a bit longer. They tend to be 3 to 5 pages. And if you're interested in that, I would make sure to look up some specific tips and guidelines for applying to the government. For example, usajobs.gov has webinars that talk about how to work within their system and how to establish a federal resume. Okay, next. Talking a little bit more about formatting. So I just have a pretty common format off here to the right. So what I mostly want to point out to you is just the ease of navigation. So large headers, clean lines that run down the side here. Your eye should be able to form a nice clean line. All of your dates should be typically right justified. This person is using lines to break up different sections. There's white space in between different sections, so that makes it more navigable. Usually the name is a bit bigger. So the whole name of the game when you're formatting a resume is how can a person skim this? How can they get through it really quickly and pick out the information they need to see? And that's going to vary person to person. So for example, this person has emphasized and bolded the names of their employers because maybe these employers are impressive in their field. But maybe you might want to emphasize the job titles that you've had. Maybe you have been a biological lab technician, and that is very relevant to what you're doing. So maybe you bold your titles. So think about what's going to work best for you. So I mentioned, I'll say it one more time here, white space is your friend. Again, with this philosophy of trying to cram as much as we can into a really small space, people a lot of times sacrifice white space. And I would say this example off to the right here, I would like to see even more white space than this person is doing. I'd like to see slightly bigger margins and a little bit more space between sections because it's going to make it that much easier to read. So if you think about taking your head out of resumes for a second, if you receive a textbook from a professor and it is just so text crowded, the text is really small, there's just no way for your eyes to navigate it, it just kind of sucks your soul right out, right? I mean, nobody wants to read a textbook like that it just is so crammed and it's just so awful to read. Well, you don't want an HR person to feel like they're like sucking the soul out of them having to read your resume. So be nice to HR people, put some white space, give them some room to understand and to skim. Don't try to overcram it. This is probably one of the number one mistakes that I see in resumes is people trying to overcrowd it. And so then I also like to ask, because this is kind of one of those $1 million questions, how long should a resume be? What do you think? This is one of those trick questions because a lot of people will say it has to be a page, always a page. And I'm not going to say that that is wrong because you might have an industry or a company where that is just how they roll. One page is what they do. But I like to counter that a little bit with, it depends. 1 to 2 pages is common, I would say, especially for your average undergraduate. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a page. So for example, I was just on a search committee for marketing managers, and many of them had 20 years of experience. And their resumes were longer. Their resumes were maybe 3 pages. And then again, we talked about CVs and government resumes being much longer. So I would say you want to be as concise as possible. And if you have only done a couple of jobs and you've had, a little bit of club involvement, some classes, you're probably looking at a 1-page resume. But if you've been in your field a really long time and you have a lot of, publications or honors, you might end up having a 2-page resume. So I don't want you to think that it can never be longer than a page. That's just one of those it depends situations. But it should never be longer than a page because you're not being concise, which is usually what happens. So just something to consider. Continuing on with formatting. So let's talk a little bit about the sample sections that we have. So education and experience are pretty much the standard. Those sections are always on there. And so in those, you're going to want to have your degree, your major, your GPA if it's above 3.0. Is usually the rule of thumb that we work with there. A lot of times people, I think they take up a little bit too much room with their education section. So you can abbreviate some things. You can say BS, Environmental Sciences, comma, Oregon State University, and the date when you're going to graduate. This is another thing people get confused about. A lot of times they're putting like ranges. It's like I started in 2014 and I'm going to finish in 2017. Just put, if you finish, let's say you're going to finish in June of 2023. Well, that's all you need to put because it's in the future, so an employer will know that means you haven't graduated yet, and that is your anticipated graduation date. So you can simplify that section. Tends to get too wordy. Then you're going to have your experience of some kind. But you don't just have to call it work experience or professional experience. You can tailor these sections to do what works for you. So maybe you have a section called research experience. Or you can see my tips here off to the right side here. You can really make headers work for you, and this is something people don't know that they can do. They feel like there are these rules that they have to follow with resumes. But here's a story to kind of illustrate this point of how you can tailor your headers. So I had a student I was working with, and I was looking through her resume, and I was trying to figure out how to showcase her experience because she really wanted to work in environmental work. She wanted to work in sustainability. But when I looked through her resume, she had bolded the names of her employers. which is very common. But the names of her employers were Victoria's Secret and Goat Ranch. So totally great experience. We were able to draw that out. But when my eyes are scanning down, and she's a sustainability person, why am I seeing Victoria's Secret and Goat Ranch? Instead, she had this really relevant experience where she went to Belize and did this really cool, worked on a reef, and got some great experience in her field, but she had listed it as a volunteer experience, and she put volunteering at the very bottom of her resume because that's what feels like you're supposed to do. Volunteering's at the bottom. So I was like, okay, how about we come up with a new section that we call sustainability fieldwork? And we put sustainability fieldwork right at the top underneath your education. And then we talk a lot about that Belize experience. And let's minimize your Victoria's Secret experience and maybe put it at the bottom under other experience or something like that. Still showing that you've been working, but let's focus on the thing that is most relevant to what you want to do in the future. And she was just like, oh, gosh, I didn't know I could do that. And so you might have a section called writing and publishing experience, or maybe you're really technically minded. So you're going to have a programming languages and projects section. And maybe that's the bulk of your resume. It goes education, and then you go into all of these like websites that you've created. So make the resume work for you. You don't have to include any section that doesn't work for you. Or for example, let's say that you got your bachelor's degree in the early 90s, and it was in something totally unrelated to what you want to do now. Well, okay, so maybe you decide that you want to drop your education to the bottom. That's totally fair game. Do what works for you, what's going to sell your specific skills. Okay, other methods for organization. So you can use those templates and such that you can find for resumes, but I tend to recommend it against it because they can be really restrictive, and sometimes the sections in them are not very relevant, and they won't let you change things very well. And then a lot of times you see the same resumes that all look the same because there's really common free templates that people use. So if that's what works for you, then go for it. But a lot of times I will just make resumes in Word, and so I wanted to talk to you about tips for doing that if you just want to keep it simple. So my favorite way to make resumes is using tables. So you can see here on this first example, so if this was part of your resume, you might go to Word and go insert and insert a table. And this is like a 2-column table here. And so for this first box, I just merged the cells here, and I made this a little bigger. And then the second box, 2 boxes here, this one I'm using for dates, and this one I'm using for the experience. And within experience, you could even add bullet points and things here. And so this helps you keep space between your dates and between the rest of the stuff, which I think really helps the eye because usually the dates and the other stuff tend to overlap, and it makes it harder to look through. And then you can build your entire resume in one table, just keep adding cells. And then, I can't show you on this view, but if you hover over the table, you'll get the little hash mark off to the upper left corner here. And you can click on that and then remove the lines of the table. And so then the employer can't see all the back end stuff. What they see is really clean lines and really well organized resume. So that's one thing that you can do. This is just even more simple, just using tabs. So maybe you bold the name of the employer, and then you tab over to the date here, and then you hit return here, and then you insert some bullets, and then you hit return again. And you can keep it really simple and still make it look nice and clean. Just think about how you right justifying or left justifying things. And I'll point out, I'm going to go a little bit more into content, but how this person is talking about working at Albertsons. So maintain facility and equipment by following instructions. Secured the department, provided customer service. So instead of saying dumped the garbage, they're really focusing on those transferable skills and explaining them in a way that makes working at a supermarket more compelling to that next professional job. So let's talk about how to word things. So we don't want boring resumes. We don't want a lot of I did this and I did that and I worked over here, because you can use verbs that are much more powerful than that. We call them power verbs, and you can find a list of these on the Career Development Center website. If you're having trouble thinking of what are the best words to highlight my skills, you can check out that resource. But it's things like supervised, analyzed, coordinated. So get away from I did, I went, I worked. First of all, it's better to not use I on your resume, but people tend to do these kind of shortened power verb sentences. So, for example, supervised 5 junior counselors, guiding them to deliver a positive experience for campers. So you see how it's past tense, it's a power verb. It's not just I did this, I did that. And you will see the second point here is quantifying your impact and results. So whenever you can use numbers to get more specific, it really helps the employer believe you, believe that you've done what you're saying that you've done, and it helps them picture it. So developed a proposal that earned the organization a $1,000 grant. So they're not just saying submitted grant proposal, they're talking about the results, and they're talking about it in terms of numbers. So if you have been working in a restaurant, say, trained 10 other employees, because a lot of times those kinds of things happen as you're working in customer service. You might be able to quantify and really show like, hey, I've shown a lot of leadership in this capacity. So here's a little quiz for you. Which bullet is best for a job at Subway? So you've worked at Subway. How would you talk about it on your resume? I'll give you a few seconds to answer this question. So a lot of people are drawn to the third bullet. Provide excellent customer service and make sandwiches for people according to company standards. Turn the oven on promptly, restock lettuce, run cash register, and remove trash from facility. Sure, that's very detailed, but it's really getting into some of the mundane details of the job, and really what you want to focus on are those results and the quantifiable accomplishments that you've made, and those things that are going to be transferable to the next job. So if you've worked at the cash register of Subway, maybe you say, provide excellent customer service, manage inventory, and streamline processes, decreasing customer wait time by 50%. Just as an example, how can you talk about the most exciting aspects of what you did for that next employer? And longer is not always better. So the objective statement. This is a hotly debated topic in the career development world. Should there be an objective statement? Should there not? In the past, everybody had an objective statement, and it would usually say something like, I'm an accounting major and I want to get a job at your company so I can work on accounting. And don't do objective statements like that anymore, because they're really just wasting real estate on your resume. So you can do an objective statement, but I recommend tweaking it slightly and making it more of a qualification statement. And you don't have to have this. It's totally optional, but sometimes this can work pretty well, especially if you're trying to convey skills and maybe, again, those jobs that you have don't exactly line up with what you're doing next, but you know you have those skills. Sometimes it's great to just bring a sentence or a couple bullet points right up to the top of your resume and list your most awesome skills for that particular employer. So, for example, this qualification statement here, computer science major with programming expertise in C++, Python, and Java, and experience building robust websites and programs for the city of Corvallis. Short, concise, it lists the things about you that are going to be most interesting to that employer, right at the top. It can be like right under your education section, or it could even be at the very top of your resume. It could be the very first thing. Or like a summary of qualification section. So this one from an agricultural perspective, 3 years experience in turf industry, maintenance, repair, and condition of golf courses, supervision of a crew of 10 people, coursework in turf management, pesticide application, propagation, agricultural business management. So these people have taken their top skills and brought them to the top of their resume. So that's something you can consider. Instead of saying, I want this job, which is very me-centric, it's how do you convey what do I bring to that organization? So organization-centric. And just reminders on things not to do on your resume, and mistakes I see really commonly. Inconsistency. People, maybe you have a job you're talking about and you're talking about it in present tense and past tense. Okay, make sure all of your bullet points are in past tense if it's a past tense job. If your bullets have periods at the end of them, make sure that they all have periods at the end of them. Make sure that all your headers are the same size. Things like that take a little time to catch, but are really important and make your resume a lot more professional. Pictures of yourself, for example, in the United States, this is not typical. The reason is that HR departments are not supposed to discriminate against people based on things like gender and nationality, etc. So you want to leave all that stuff off of the resume. I know that this can be common in other countries to include some of this information, but it's not common in the United States, so avoid that. References. You definitely want references. You want to have those great references ready to go, but it's not common to include them on your resume anymore or to say references available upon request. That's something that you typically leave off these days, and employers, when they're in the interview process, will ask for references, or they will ask for them in the application. A lot of times there's a separate document that's the application from the resume. So keep that in mind. Or sometimes you can turn in a reference sheet, but it usually is not something that we're going to want to waste space on our resume putting people's names. Make sure not to include any information that the employer would not understand. They don't have the context to understand. So the example I put here was like CEOS, the College of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences at Oregon State. They don't know what CEOS means, so you need to spell that out. Or if you're going to list, bioresource research class, you don't want to include the course numbers because that's not relevant to the employer. So always think is this information something that they understand or can use? And then last tip on the resume, don't rush out a resume at 2 a.m. in the morning and submit it. Really take time to sleep on it, come back to it several times. You'll always catch additional things. And if you can get a friend or a parent or a spouse or somebody to read over your resume, even if they're totally not related to your field, another person will almost always catch a few things or make suggestions that you would have never thought of. So take the time to for that person to help you out, or for as many people as possible to look at the resume. Transitioning into cover letters. So we're going to go through this fairly quickly because employers tend to start with a resume when they're reviewing because resumes are easier to review in a short period of time. Cover letters take more investment, so a lot of employers don't really read the cover letter until they're really considering that their top employees that they're looking at. But let's talk a little bit about cover letters. Basic cover letter format. And you can just look up online business letter format. It's the same thing. But everything is going to be left justified here. So we're not doing the indenting thing. You're using spaces between paragraphs. Oops, sorry. Spaces between paragraphs to create that space instead of indents. You want the employer's address block up here. For example, Miss Fancy Pants lives in Hired City. So again, left justified, their address block, and you want your contact information. So it could be next is your contact information, or it could be that you list your contact information under your name for Mr. SpongeBob S Pants here. And it usually is just a page. I have personally written a couple page cover letter before, but I was also in a writing industry, so one page is more typical. Usually, if you're going to print it out, you want to sign it, so you want to leave 4 spaces so you can make that signature there. Here's a little tip that most people don't know, and I always appreciate it when I see someone that does know this. In business letters, you're supposed to use a colon and not a comma after the greeting. Probably most people don't know that, but it's one of those things that I think is important because it's business letter formatted. So philosophical things with the cover letter. You're not just repeating your resume in letter form. So if you've already given the information on your resume, don't just repeat it again. you want your cover letter to be more a story of how you fit that company, why you're excited to work for them, conveying real enthusiasm and conveying, why they should hire you. So you really want to illustrate your capabilities using positive facts. So this is not a time to just brag, and people always struggle with that line, like what's bragging versus being honest. Let your facts speak for you. So you might want to pick a couple of accomplishments that you're particularly proud of and talk about them in greater depth. So for me, it might have been, a public relations campaign that I ran for Microsoft, and the number of people that we reached with this campaign, and how I developed the communications plan and how the event went, and just kind of illustrating things that I've done in greater depth than you can do on the resume. So let's talk about paragraph by paragraph. So that first paragraph, that first sentence, you're going to identify the job that you're applying for. A lot of times companies have a lot of jobs going, and so you're going to mention that job. Sometimes there's a job number you can include. This is a great place to name drop if you happen to know somebody at the company. I'm applying on the recommendation of this person, or based on my interactions with this person, I'm really passionate about your company. And this is really where you can start connecting with the organization's mission statement, and conveying why you really want to work there. I read a lot of really boring cover letters where people are not conveying that they're excited to work at that company, and a company really wants to see that you're excited to be there. The body paragraphs, you could have 1 to 3 of these. That's when you're kind of get into some of those specific quantifiable results, like I was saying, like a public relations campaign that I did, or projects that you did in school that was really robust and you got really great results. Something like that. The closing paragraph is pretty simple. It's just summarizing what your top points, and then encouraging them to contact you for an interview in some way. So let's look at examples. And normally, if I was there in person, I would make you guys read these for me, but I'm going to go through and read these because I can't get your help in this situation. So an example opening paragraph, and this is all just made up titles and people and places, but of course, a picture of Portland because, that's where we're from over here in Oregon. So an example opening paragraph. I'm applying for the position of office associate with the P-Town Waterfront Alliance based on the recommendation of PWA manager Tim Powers. So name dropping. I will graduate in May 2019 from Oregon State with a BS in Geography and Geospatial Science. And I see this position as the ideal opportunity to apply my professional experience and coursework in GIS and mapping. I'm excited to further PWA's mission to create a Portland waterfront that is accessible to all to work, live, and play. So you can see this person they're name dropping, they're mentioning their top qualifications. So for them, it's their coursework, their expertise in GIS, and then they're connecting with the mission. That doesn't mean you always need to list their mission statement or anything like that. It can look a lot of different ways. So I was working with a student who was having a lot of trouble articulating his value and starting a cover letter. And just in talking with him, he's a forestry student, I learned that his family had been in the logging industry and had started a logging company, 4 or 5 generations back. And he was so excited to carry on his family's legacy. And I was like, forestry is in your blood. Let's talk about that. I'm a 4th generation logger. I love being in the forest. And that is why I want to carry on my family's legacy, and I want to be part of your company. I mean, show some excitement for what they're doing and why you fit in it. So it doesn't have to be this really rote, boring letter. Why do you connect with that company? So an example body paragraph. So getting into some of those accomplishments. My internship with Eugene Imaginary Utilities last summer has prepared me well for administration. There, I coordinated internship placements for over 200 students in the Eugene community. I collected and organized applications, corresponded with students and sponsors, and maintained an Excel database of all internship sites. I've honed the organizational and time management skills necessary to be a successful intern with the Oregon Department of Education. So, quantifying results, going through top skills, like we talked about. And then that closing paragraph of encouraging an interview. So last tip on resume and cover letter, they're really just the beginning. What really makes a huge difference in getting hired is networking. And I could teach an entire whole session on networking. But I'll say this, follow up. Connect with the company. So don't think of the resume as the end of your work here. This is just the beginning. So for example, before you submit your resume, maybe you call up the hiring manager or the HR representative and you just ask them a couple of questions about the job that you're interested in. You go through the job description and you say like, hey, I'm really interested in this. I wanted to introduce myself and I just had a couple of questions if you have a few minutes. Because what that does is when that resume goes into the stack of 100 other resumes, they've talked to you. They know your name. So find some sort of way to connect with that company. Also, let's say you've been working with a recruiter through a career fair or you've been in communication with them. Maybe you apply for this job and then you send them an email and say, hey, I just applied for this job. I'm really looking forward to hearing back from you. It's been so great working with you. So let me know if you have any questions about my candidacy. Very simple ways to just get your name in their mind. So try to come up with some way to connect with that company, whatever way makes sense. Now, obviously, if they're saying, no phone calls, please, then respect that. If it says that on their website, don't push them. But a lot of companies don't say that, and making some sort of connection either directly or through somebody else that you know at the company can really, really help you get that job. And then just mentioning your resources again, there are some resume and cover letter resources on career.oregonstate.edu. And then Handshake is where you would go to make an appointment with the career advisor from your college. And again, the career advisors do take remote appointments with students via phone. So I hope this has been helpful. Thank you for your time.